Hey friends, welcome to Worship at the Gathering. My name is Adam Baker. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm also your online host. Really grateful that you've joined us for worship today. If you're new to our channel and you haven't done so yet, go ahead and click the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. There's a reason for that. There's always new messages that are available to you here at the Gathering. They're also available throughout the week on demand. So if you'd like to go back and revisit a message, re-listen to it, or share it with a friend, it's available to you. We're always trying to release new content to help you grow in your faith journey. And I don't want you to miss out on any of that. So click subscribe, turn on your notifications. You'll always know when something new is available to you. There's also a link in the description for this video to find out more about the church. There's a link to give to support the ministries of the church as well. And there's a link to a Connect card, which I think is probably one of the more important things that you can do today is to fill out that card. Let us know that you're here, that you're worshiping with us. We want to reach out to you and get you more connected with this community. So this is the first sermon in a brand new sermon series. It is called Emotional Roller Coaster. And we are exploring the different emotions that Jesus experienced during that final week of his life, or what Christians call Holy Week. I think it's going to be a really important message, and I'm glad that you're here to experience it with me. If it does mean a lot to you, please share it with a friend, invite somebody to watch next week's message or this message with you. Sit down and watch it together. Again, thanks friends for being here today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gathering. Thank you so much for being in worship, especially all of you who listen online. Thank you. Like a lot of you, I am recovering from a cold. I feel great, but I have a little bit of a cough. I'm trying not to cough, but I have my hot tea just so I am ready. But if you're ever around the Gathering office, you will regularly see this sticker. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see it. It's called an emotions wheel. Maybe some of you have seen this. It has, all sorts of emotions around the circle. It says what that emotion feels like, what you can do with that particular emotion. And they're kind of everywhere. If you don't know this, Pastor Charity here on our staff, she is a champion of emotional intelligence. In fact, she teaches on this. She preaches on it. She talks about it a lot. She's always kind of trying to get us to see emotional awareness as a bigger part of our culture. And so you'll see this wheel all over the place. And some of you might be wondering why. Why is it so important to her and really to us? Well, I think the reason it's important for us is because for many people, emotions are seen as kind of a negative thing. I mean, something we have to deal with, but they're not particularly good. We often say pejoratively, so-and-so got emotional, meaning they sort of lost their cool, they stopped thinking. In fact, we often pit sort of reason against emotion. We really try to make decisions by not getting emotional. But the wisdom on this has really changed. Now everywhere, actually, from Harvard Business School to psychology training, people are taught the importance of what's called emotional intelligence. And when I say emotional intelligence, I'll give you a definition. It's the ability to understand and manage your emotions. As one person puts it, it's the blending of thinking and feeling to make optimal or to make your best decisions. I mean, the big idea underneath this is emotions actually matter. They are important, and we are better people when we're in touch with what we're feeling. And we even see this actually demonstrated in the life of Jesus. Today we're beginning a new series called Emotional Roller Coaster, the ups and downs of Jesus' last days. And as you've heard, we're beginning the season of Lent. This is the first of 6 Sundays that lead us up to Easter. And traditionally in the church, Lent is a time of prayer, of fasting, of abstaining from certain things so that we can focus ourselves more on God. But Lent is also a time where we really turn our attention to the last days, those stories in the last week of Jesus' life. And when you do that, which is what we're doing over the next 6 weeks, one of the things that you'll notice about these stories is that they are deeply emotional. We see Jesus almost at his most human, experiencing all the things that we as humans experience: sadness and joy, hope and disappointment, betrayal and grief. And so over the next 6 weeks, each week we're going to look at a different story of Jesus' last days. We're going to look at one of the emotions that Jesus felt. And by looking at the way that Jesus dealt with and managed his emotions, I think it's going to teach us something really important about how we manage our own emotions. And so today I want to start with a really famous example of Jesus experiencing sadness or grief. It's a famous story because it contains the shortest verse of the Bible. In a lot of translations, that verse just says, Jesus wept, or Jesus cried. So what is it that made Jesus cry? Well, the story says that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem for what would be his last Passover meal. I mean, this would be the last week of his life when he would die. And on his way there, he's getting close. He's approaching the little town of Bethany. And in Bethany lives three of Jesus's very close friends, the siblings Lazarus, and then his sisters, Mary and Martha. And so as Jesus is going there, someone comes and they say, Jesus, hurry up, come, Lazarus is sick. You need to come save him. But Jesus does sort of a curious thing when he hears this news. John says, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was. After 2 days, he said to his disciples, now let's return to Judea again. So it's kind of weird. Jesus stays in town for 2 more days. He finishes up what he was doing, and then he's going to go visit Lazarus. But the problem is this. From the time Jesus heard the news to the time Jesus started moving, Lazarus has since died. And when he finally arrives to Bethany, Mary's there, Martha's there, all the villagers and the Jewish people are all gathered around. They're already there. They've already buried Lazarus in the tomb, and they're a little disappointed. They're angry that Jesus wasn't there sooner. So one of the sisters says, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And when Jesus saw her crying, and all the Jews who had come with her crying, the story says that he was deeply disturbed and troubled. And he asked, where have you laid him? They replied, Lord, come and see. And when they showed him the tomb where his good friend Lazarus was dead, there's that famous verse. It says, Jesus began to cry, or Jesus wept. Now, this isn't the only time that Jesus cries in Scripture, but it is the most famous. Now, before I move on in the story, I want to stop right here because I think we too quickly rush to the miracle, which is coming. But it's worth stopping right here and considering this sort of collective moment of really deep emotion where it says that everyone is experiencing sadness. I mean, the Jews, the villagers, Mary, Martha, and it says that in the midst of all this sadness, even Jesus got sad. Even Jesus began to cry. And I think that when we look at this, there's a reason that this scene is sort of painted for us. There's something important about stopping right here and asking ourselves a few questions. What does this have to sort of teach us about sadness? Well, the first thing I think the story is meant to sort of convey to us is that it's a good thing to cry. It's not only okay to cry, it's good to cry. Now, this sounds kind of obvious, but have you ever thought about like why Jesus was crying? I get why everyone else was crying. They were sad. Lazarus was dead, but the story says Jesus knew Lazarus was going to die. He even waited 2 days, almost to like let Lazarus die. Jesus knew that when he got there, he could raise him from the dead. Jesus knew this didn't have to be a permanent thing. So why in the world did Jesus cry? Now, interpreters go to all these great lengths to try to explain this. Well, Jesus didn't really, he wasn't really sad. He was doing this strategically. He was doing it to sort of sympathize with the disciples. He was doing this for all these other reasons. But it's almost like we think that Jesus couldn't have just been sad. It's almost like we think that sadness is a bad thing, but here's the reason that Jesus cried. The reason Jesus cried, at least according to Scripture, is because Jesus was sad. Even Jesus felt it. It says that when he got there, when he saw the disciples, when he saw the Jewish people, when he saw Mary, Martha, when he saw the tomb, the story says he was overcome. His spirit was deeply disturbed and troubled. And Jesus began to weep. No, Jesus didn't cry for some other reason. Jesus cried because it was sad. And in so doing, he shows us that it's not a bad thing to cry. This past week, I did 2 funerals for 2 families who have been here at the gathering for a long time, people I've known for a really long time, on Friday and on Saturday. On Friday, I did a funeral for Crystal Darrow. Her and her family have been coming to the McCausland site for 15 plus years. She always sat in the same place. Someone I was really close with, Jeff Spangaman, and his wife Jenny, also been coming to the gathering for many, many years, well over a decade. And we celebrated his life on Saturday. And in the past few months, I realized that I've done 5 funerals for people that I've known 15 to 20 years. And I found myself the past 5 months, sad. My own grief actually has kind of caught me by surprise. I'm confessing this to you. I mean, I've been doing funerals for a really long time. I've gotten good at my job, which is to be focused and be there for a family and sort of put my own feelings at a back seat. But this week, I don't know what it was. Maybe it's in the wake of all 5 of these funerals, in the wake of what's been happening nationally, the wake of life just feeling heavy for so many people. But I found myself feeling sadder than I normally do. And so I decided I needed to actually do something with it. And so actually, starting a few weeks ago, I started talking to my counselor, my therapist, a little bit about this feeling. And she asked me more about it. She asked me if I ever do cry, if I have an outlet for the grief. I don't a lot. And then she asked me a question that sort of caught me by surprise. She said, Matt, can I back up and just ask you, do you ever give yourself permission to be sad? Do you give yourself permission to be sad? I think it was a way of her saying, Matt, it's okay to be sad. Do you think it's okay to be sad? Sadness, I think, is a funny emotion, maybe especially for guys. I don't know, stereotyping a little bit, but it's what a lot of psychologists call a primary emotion. And what they mean by that is we feel sadness, but then we quickly move to a secondary emotion to try to cover it up. It's complex. So sometimes our sadness comes out as anger. Sometimes our sadness comes out as anxiety. Sometimes our sadness comes out as even fake happiness. But we do a lot to sort of cover up the emotion of sadness. And I get why. I mean, there's sort of a helplessness to feeling sad. Sadness can seem weak to a lot of people. Sadness can seem sort of negative or pessimistic. And we don't want to be around people who are sad. We don't particularly like experiencing it ourselves. And I think for all these reasons, it's part of the reason we try to explain away Jesus being sad. But Jesus, the story says, cried because he was sad. He was disturbed and his spirit was troubled. He did this. And by doing it, I think what he shows all of us is it's okay to be sad. It's a good thing to express sadness. And so I'm going to ask you the same question that my therapist asked me. Do you give yourself permission to be sad? In fact, right now, at this moment where Jesus is gathered with everyone else, is there something in your life that's a place of loss or of disappointment or of grief? Maybe for some of us, we know what it's like to lose someone that we deeply love, but for all of us, we've lost certain kinds of relationships, not just to death, but in all sorts of ways. Maybe it's the loss of a marriage. I was talking to somebody recently who didn't quite look right, and I asked them what was going on, and they said, well, today's the anniversary of my divorce, and even though I know it was the right thing and I've moved on, it's still a time of sadness. Maybe it's sadness over a relationship that's not what you want it to be in your life. Maybe a relationship with your mom or your dad or your son or your daughter. Oftentimes, relationships can fall short of our expectations. Maybe it's about a friend that has disappointed or an opportunity in life that hasn't turned out the way that you thought. I mean, you look around and there's the heaviness and sadness that some of us feel just about what's happening collectively in our world and in our country. Whether it's examples of war around the world or some things that are happening to people right here in our own country, maybe it's just where we are politically and the divisiveness that it seems to bring, not just online, but sometimes at the heart of some of our most important relationships. Maybe it's sadness over something going on in your life, a team you didn't make, a direction that was closed off to you, an opportunity that you didn't get. sometimes it's sadness that's hard to name, but just a sadness that we seem to feel over the world we live in or the place that we are right now in life. And one of the things that Jesus shows us here is it's important. It's not just okay, it's good sometimes to be sad, to feel that sadness. I mean, the saying is really true that the only way to the other side of that sadness is to go through it. There's something important in feeling it. And so the first insight is like Jesus models for us that it's okay, it's even good to be sad. A second thing I think we learn from this collective moment of grief is it's important to cry in community. I don't know how many of you have ever been around like little kids who get hurt, but what you notice is when a little kid gets hurt, when they start crying, what do? Well, they'll run to like the safe adult, parent or whoever else is around. They'll run to you. Maybe they'll bury their face in your legs. They'll want to hug you. They'll want you to comfort them and make them feel better. I mean, they run toward you. But then something really funny happens as kids get a little bit older. It doesn't take long, but there hits a point where the older we get, all of a sudden when we get hurt, when we start crying, we don't run toward, but we run away from other people. We want to be alone. And I don't know where all that comes from. Maybe it's we're embarrassed to show it. Maybe we don't want other people to see us and in that kind of a state. It's vulnerable, but we want to be alone. And you know what? This actually isn't natural. Biologically, when we cry, our instinct is to be comforted by others. But I think for many of us, what we feel we need to do is be alone. But what I'm reminded of in this story is that Jesus reminds us that when we cry, we actually need to do it with other people. I mean, do you notice that in the story? Crying is a community act. No one seems to be hiding it. Everyone is there doing it together. Mary's there, Martha's there, the Jewish people are there, the friends are there, even Jesus. He doesn't quickly do his thing and then go off and cry by himself. He cries right there with them. Crying is communal. Why? Well, I think the reason why is because sadness is best processed with other people. And the evil one tempts us to do this alone, but Jesus wants us to do it with community. Many of you may not know this, but over the course of a year at the gathering, 1,000 groups meet over the 3 sites that we have here. Now think about that. That means that any night of the week that you come up here, there'll at least be 2, 3, 4 different groups meeting. And these are all sorts of groups. They're classes, they're core groups, but a lot of these groups are support groups. They're wellness groups that we have here at the church. They're AA. There are other sorts of recovery groups. These groups are thriving, and there's a really important reason why. I mean, some of these groups are helping people who are going through anxiety. Some of these people are banding together to find strength to overcome addiction. Some of these groups are groups that are helping people with LGBTQ kids to learn how to be the best parents they can be. Some of these, the most popular ones, are just grief groups, people who've experienced loss. And I thought, why are those groups so popular? And the reason they're so popular is because there is extraordinary power in not going through a season of struggle or a season of difficulty alone. And so I want to ask you, when you're sad, what do you do with it? Do you pull away from all the resources that God has placed around you in your life, or do you actually seek out other people? We need others. We need to do this in community. Have you paid attention to the people that are available to you? Maybe it's a spouse, or maybe it's a close friend or a group of friends. Maybe it's your core group. Maybe it is one of the support groups that we offer here at church. Maybe it is a therapist or a boss or a coworker. But who are you sad with? You know, part of our motto here at the gathering is we do not want you to struggle alone. If any of you need help in knowing where to turn, we want you to know to come to one of us as a pastor. But what Jesus models for us in this moment is that it's important to cry in community. And then I think the last insight, and maybe the most important that we see here, is sadness is a place of transformation. It's only when everyone is kind of in this collective moment of sadness together, where even Jesus is expressing his own sadness, that the real miracle happens. It says this in verse 39. It says, Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days. It's been 4 days now. Jesus replied, didn't I tell you that if you believe, you'll see God's glory? So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me. Then having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his feet bound, his hands tied, his face covered with cloth. Jesus said to them, untie him and let him go. I mean, this, of course, is an incredible miracle. It's a foreshadowing of just a week later when Jesus himself would die and be raised from the dead. But I also think this moment is a really important symbol. It's a symbol of Jesus's power to do a new thing. Even with something as permanent as death, it's a sign that Jesus can take loss and sadness and transform it into something hopeful in the future. It's literally in reversing Lazarus's death, Jesus showing us that he can transform even our own places of loss, of grief, and of sadness. But Jesus, you see, can't transform what we don't first offer up. Jesus can't do something with our own sadness if we don't first recognize it ourselves, if we don't name it and offer it out for Jesus to do something with. But I think when we actually allow ourselves to feel sad, when we process it with others, that's the first step towards Jesus beginning to change it, to transform it in some powerful way. Recently I was talking with a friend who had lost their spouse, and it was a profound loss. The person died, way too young. And I asked them how they were doing. I asked them what has been helping, and they said, what's really been helping is I've been talking to some other people, and I finally just offered to talk to someone who I knew was struggling with losing a spouse themselves. I was amazed by this because this person had just lost their own spouse, and here they were sort of helping somebody else. And I asked them, I said to them, that's really inspiring. Why did you choose to do that? And the guy said back to me, I find that when I use my own experience to help somebody else, it's the beginning of a sort of transformation of it. And it reminded me of something that I really deeply believe, and that is that your place of greatest woundedness can become your point of greatest witness, meaning that sometimes Jesus can take that place of collective grief and sadness, and it can be a place of profound transformation for us, of change. It can be turned into something that we have to offer the world. Ultimately, I think the reason the story wants us to contemplate our sadness is because ultimately Jesus wants to free us from it. Jesus wants to move us through it and to the other side of a place of hope and possibility. And when we're sad, we're vulnerable. When you allow yourself to be sad, you're sort of open in a way that you're not always open. When you're sad, you realize your need for others. And this is where Jesus can do some of Jesus's best work. And so, friends, today, as we close, I just want to ask you a question. Do you give yourself permission to feel sad? For those of you who do right now and sometimes feel like somehow you're not doing it right because you're feeling sad, I want you to know that Jesus is there. He's been there. It's not only okay, it's good to feel sad. To others of you who might be wrestling, thinking that, oh man, if I show sadness, it's somehow a sign of something bad. No, Jesus himself shows us it's not only okay, but good. Today, I want to remind you that if you are sad, don't do that alone. Fight that tendency to want to run away and instead run towards others, because Jesus shows us that we're meant to cry in community. And maybe more than anything else, I want you to know that as you sit with sadness, as you name it, as you reflect on what's feeling heavy in your life right now, all of this can be the condition for a profound change in your life. And so ultimately, I hope today can be a day where you offer that sadness up to Jesus with the deep belief that he can transform it, because it's right here when we're honest with God and with ourselves about where we are that Jesus can do some of his best and his most hopeful work. Let's pray. Gracious and holy God, for so many of us right now, we feel deeply that sense of grief and sadness. Maybe it's because we've lost someone in our own life. Maybe it's a sadness we feel over the state of our relationships or the lack thereof. Maybe it's a sadness for the world and where we are, the divisiveness we see around us, the hurt in the lives of others. Maybe it's just life is not what we wanted and expected it to be. God, wherever we are, I pray that we would take the permission, that we would trust you that it's okay to be where we are. It's even a good thing. Help us to not isolate ourselves, but to share that with other people, to seek out the resources that you've placed around us. And ultimately, God, I pray that as we would be open with our own sadness, it would be a place that you could begin to change us and do something new in us. Untie us and unbind us from that place of sadness so that we can continue to move forward in the life that you've created for us. It's in Jesus's powerful name that we pray. Amen.